And one of his first disciples was a very powerful scholar whose name was Dasharathi. And Dasharathi was very, very renowned for being a scholar, and he was also a sannyasi. And once he approached Ramanuja and he said that I have a question. And he said, I want to know the meaning of this verse, Sarva Dharman Paritajya, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. And Ramanuja said, you go and beg in different houses for 1 year and come back. And then I'll reveal to you the answer. That was the standard of answering questions in that period. That one question, and he said, go and become a beggar and come back and then I'll answer. And Dasharathi, he did for a few days and came back and said, but this question is really bothering me and I would be really grateful if you answer. And Raman said, it's a very difficult query. You go to one of my other gurus and he requested him to go to Goshtipurna. And so Dasharathi, under the instructions of Ramanuja, went to Goshtipurna. And Goshtipurna did not even ask him why he has come. As soon as he came, he just said, okay, engage in this service. And immediately put him in the service of the mutt. And after 6 months, Goshtipurna asked him, okay, why did you come here in the first place? So he said, I had this question. I want to know what is the meaning of this verse, Sarva Dharman Paritajya. And Goshtipurna said, very difficult query. I do not have the answer. Only Ramanuja can answer that. Go back to him. So after spending 6 months serving there, without getting an answer, again he returned back. And again he approached Ramanuja. And he said, I did not get the answer to this question. At that time, Kanchipurna's daughter, whose name was Atulai, she had just come back from from her in-laws' home. And she was reporting to Ramanuja that my in-laws, they engage me in so much of menial service. I have to go and bring water for 6 miles. I have to cut vegetables, cook, clean the home, take care of the children. And it is becoming so difficult for me that I just requested my mother-in-law if I could have a domestic servant. And my mother-in-law replied, if you want a domestic servant, go to your father's house and get one. We are not going to supply any domestic servant. So I have come here to my father's home so that I can get some servant. Ramanuja looked at Dasharathi. And he looked at Atulai again. And he said, you want a domestic servant? I have a very good domestic servant. Here he is. And Dasharathi was such a powerful scholar, sannyasi, and he was being told to become the domestic servant in the home of a lady. And you can imagine what a grave test this was. What a severe test Ramanuja was subjecting Dasharathi to. And he just told him, you go and become servant in this home. And if any ordinary person now is subjected to this kind of test, it is practically impossible to take such a test. Dasharathi could have just said, okay, I am leaving your mission, I am going somewhere else. You are mistreating me. I am not being taken care well. You are misunderstanding me. And generally, the tendency of people who are intelligent is somehow to escape authority. And the general tendency is that, okay, if I cannot get things done like this, let me go here. If I can't get things done here, let me go here. So, generally, with intelligence, one has a tendency to use that intelligence to somehow avoid surrendering and find ways and means by which he can find some shelter where he will not be forced to surrender. And that is one of the biggest traps of the intelligence. And therefore, Vaishnavism means to follow the principles of surrender and using one's intelligence on how to surrender. So generally in Kali Yuga, the intelligence is used to ask question, why should I surrender? Whereas real principle is that after understanding the principle, we try to use the intelligence to execute how to surrender. What are the ways and means by which this particular task can be done? So therefore, Dasharatha also had a choice. He had parallel lines of authority because Ramanuja had so many other gurus also. And he could have left Ramanuja at that time and felt that this person is too difficult to deal with. And therefore it is better for me to go back to Goshti Purna, because at least for 6 months he kept me in the mud and only said that I can't answer the question, but didn't give such a service of going to someone's house and being domestic servant. Let me go back there again. So he had all possible choices in that scenario. But the real test was that when Ramanuja put the pressure, he didn't buckle under that pressure. He didn't become disloyal. He just maintained his loyalty and he just said, I will follow whatever you say. Similar case we find in Jiva Goswami also. That although Jiva Goswami was the greatest scholar in history, but when put to the acid test, when he was put to that ultimate test by Rupa Goswami, and Rupa Goswami felt that Jiva Goswami acted improperly, and he gave him an order, leave Vrindavan. This is not a place for people with false pride. So he was in one sense thoroughly misunderstood. And he could have felt that I have not been understood properly. And he could have left. But Jiva Goswami just took that instruction and with humility spent his time. And then when again accepted by Rupa Goswami on the plea of Sanatana Goswami, came back and continued the service without any grudge, without any feeling of bitterness within his heart. And therefore, to understand bhakti, we have to appreciate this principle. Because ultimately the soul has come to the material world because of rebellion against Krishna. And one can only sustain his life in the spiritual world when one is willing to absolutely follow whatever Krishna desires. And therefore the principle of devotional service begins with the willingness to surrender. And one can only get the practice for surrender under the shelter of a living representative. Because Krishna does not have the power to give us direct instructions in his deity form or in any other form. And therefore the representatives of the Lord, they apply the test on behalf of the Lord to check whether the person is ready to enter into the spiritual world where this kind of principle is the standard. And here, when Ramanuja applied that test to Dasharatha, with all of his intelligence, with all of his scholarship, rather than feeling offended, he just accepted it as the will of the Lord. And because he had affection for Ramanuja, he just accepted it. And then he just went to Atulai's home. And he was just performing all the menial activities in home. And for someone who had been respected as a sannyasi, it is practically unimaginable. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of the home, just because Ramanuja had said. A very, very high standard, a very high degree of surrender, which we can only feel inspired by hearing. And then, it so happened that after a few months, there was a scholar who visited the home, visited the village. And this scholar was making a presentation. And while presenting, there was a tinge of Mayavad in his speech. And because Dasharatha was a trained Vaishnava sannyasi scholar, he could detect this immediately. And although he was dressed as a cook, and he was just sitting and hearing this lecture along with so many others, he just could not resist himself. He just could not remain quiet. Immediately he got up and he started defending Vaishnava philosophy and started attacking this person. And he made objection that what you have just spoken is Mayavad, is not correct. It is not according to the conclusions of Vedic literatures. And the scholar was bewildered. And he saw his dress and he thought that this man is a cook. And he said, this is an arena for scholarly debate. This is not a kitchen. Shut up and sit down. But then Dasharatha did not keep quiet. He continued ahead, made more presentations and defended himself, made his point. Then the scholar understood, this cannot be an ordinary cook. He came down, offered his obeisances and said, who are you? You cannot be an ordinary cook. How come you are presenting philosophy so clearly? And then Dasharatha revealed that actually my name is Dasharatha and I am the servant of Ramanuja. And at that time, the people, they had heard of Dasharatha as a great devotee, a disciple of Ramanuja. But because there was no photograph or internet, nobody had seen the picture of Dasharatha, that this is how Dasharatha looks. So when they heard this is Dasharatha, all of them became scared. And especially the members in Atulai's house, they were practically shivering. And they said, if you are a sannyasi, what are you doing at our home? Doing all kinds of menial household duties at our home. And Dasharatha said, what to do? My Guru Maharaj, Shripad Ramanuja, he just wanted to test me. So he has sent me to your home. I asked him a question about surrender, and this was his answer. So Atulai's all family members started saying, you may be having something between Guru and disciple, but why you are involving us? Because by engaging you in our service, we will go to hell. They said, we will certify to Ramanuja that you have already passed this test. Allow us to take you back. So they all arranged a palanquin, and in a big procession, he was brought back to Ramanuja. And they all declared to Ramanuja that, please, your disciple is very, very glorious. He has passed the test. He's completely surrendered. Please accept him back. So Ramanuja was very pleased with Dasharatha. And because of this surrender, and because of the attitude of service which he had shown, Ramanuja said that from this day onwards, Dasharatha will also be known as Vaishnava Das, the servant of all the Vaishnavas. And he glorified him immensely.